Sex trafficking has escalated exponentially in Nigeria over the last decade, with tens of thousands of young women and girls either getting lured or forced into sex slavery. The UN's International Organization for Migrations recently reported a 600% increase in women arriving in Italy, many of them from Nigeria. A recent Netflix movie, Oloture, follows the story of a young female journalist who goes undercover as a prostitute to expose a human trafficking syndicate. So joining me now to talk more about this is the CEO and president of EbonyLife Media and EbonyLife Place, Mo Abudu. I hope I said your name right, Mo. She's also the executive producer of this film, which she collaborated on with Netflix. Thank you so much for joining us. This movie drew me in right from the very first scene.
It does. It is one of those movies that draws you in.
Yes, the characters are fascinating, and the storyline is really fascinating. So it aims to portray sort of the calculated methods of traffickers and how to prevent sex trafficking across Africa. Can you tell us more about just how extensive sex trafficking is and why more young women are being forced into prostitution?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I think it's important to note that sex trafficking in itself isn't just an African problem. It's a global problem. The reason why it is as successful as it is and why it's a booming trade of $150 billion a year is because the journey may start in Africa, but it doesn't end in Africa. It's all about supply and demand, and there's definitely a demand for this. Now, when we're talking about the women and the young girls and the children that get drawn into it, that's where the challenge is for us. And that's why we decided that it was important for us to tell such a compelling story and such a hard-hitting story. It's really about trying to understand why anyone would think that their only choice in life is to actually become this person that gets trafficked. Now, how does it happen? What are the ins and outs of it? And that's what we try to explore in Oloture. And of course, the response around the world has been overwhelming. Is this the sort of story that you want to tell about Africa? We've always said as EbonyLife that we will continue to tell stories that highlight our challenges, celebrate us when we have to celebrate, but also talk about the challenges that we face. And this obviously is a major challenge, but it's not just a Nigerian problem. I must emphasize that this is a global problem. And as you know, a lot of our girls end up in Italy. So we have to say, why is that? And what are they doing when they get there? And how are they housed? And where are they? So obviously, it's not to say that Italians don't know that this exists. It's not to say that Nigerians or Africans don't know. We've been so silent about it. We see it, but we refuse in the main to do much about it. I mean, I have numbers that say there were only 11,000 convictions as far back as 2018. Now, why is that? This is a $150 billion trade around the world.
And I wonder, too, when you talk about convictions, because we see it even here, that sometimes those who are convicted are quite often those who are the victims of the whole trade, you know, and they get sort of folded in with the people who are victimizing them. So there's this sort of quick, interesting scene where you have a trafficker, who's a woman, by the way, and she's talking to kind of like an old school pimp. And she says to him, your time is done. You are analog, and this is kind of the digital time. And one of the elements that you brought up in the film is the use of technology and apps, and how they're almost assisting, they're making it a lot easier for sex traffickers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, of course, when we decided to do the movie, we did lots and lots of research on how is this trade, how does it operate in terms of what are the ins and outs of it. And what we found was that yes, the pimps, as they've been described and recognized, no longer really exist. A lot of the girls are using apps. And a lot of these apps, they're out there. I mean, I have a few names here. There's one called Down Dating and Daddy and the Lexi app. These are real apps that are out there that you can actually download and you can use to meet and engage with a particular, sort of dark community on. Now, it does exist. Now, we all know tech is life and life is tech. And it's not to say that this particular trade is left out of exploring this horrid trade through using technology. I mean, technology, as we know, can be used for good and can be used for bad. And those that are thriving in this industry today are obviously using some of these apps to meet their customers. Again, it's about supply and demand. There is a willing customer out there that you can engage with by using these apps to reach out to them. So it's global. These apps are not just, and they're not made in, some of them are not even made in Nigeria. They're global apps that you can basically download anywhere in the world, and you will find a willing buyer, and there's a willing seller. Yeah.
I want to touch on something that you kind of brought up a little bit earlier about choosing to make a movie about this particular topic. So you partnered with Netflix to create actually a number of movies, but this is sort of the premiere title. And you know, you a little bit touched on pushback that you may have received about exposing this particular issue in Africa. And I know that there are always concerns about, listen, Africa already gets a lot of bad publicity. There are already a lot of negative stereotypes, negative imagery about the continent. So I'm wondering why you thought, let's start here with this painful conversation. It's not pretty, but this is a story that needs to be told.
Well, this is actually our 7th movie. The other prior 6 movies that we have made have been very sort of like romantic and funny, and, you know, you're in a good place. You know, you sort of go home with that nice sort of, you know, feeling in your tummy. But we decided as EbonyLife that it was important for us to play in other genres. And we wanted to start with something that was going to be hard-hitting and compelling. But at the same time, a story that would create awareness about this ill in our society and around the world. And we spent quite a lot of time, you know, sort of researching the storyline and deciding about how we were going to shoot it and, you know, all those ins and outs that you do when it's time to make a movie. But we just felt that it was time to do something that was going to be hard-hitting. And everyone said to us that, wow, for us to have made the transition from the normal types of films that we make that are very sort of happy-go-lucky to something that's hard-hitting as this was a real transition for us. Now, are we going to stay in this space? It's a space that we're in and would like to continue to make such hard-hitting stories. But again, it's not to say that we're not going to make those movies again that make you feel good and go home and you know, and feel nice and cozy. So I think it's important to just play in as many. I mean, Africa is wide. There's a lot of things going on in Africa for good, some that we're challenged about. And of course, it's important to shed the light on those challenges and say to ourselves, what are we going to do about them? Now, this obviously has created a lot of conversation around the world. And I'm hoping that our leaders around the world pay some attention to sex trafficking, because as I keep saying, it is a global problem. And we need to come together and say, how do we find solutions to this?
Yeah, well, I encourage people, if you got a Netflix subscription, check out the movie. I think it also was a reminder to me that there's an awful lot of great work, artistic work coming out of Africa, but specifically coming out of Nigeria when it comes to the film industry, that this is a movie that you would go to the theater down the street and go watch. It has drama, it has great acting, it has an incredible story, and you walk away better educated than you were before. Mo, Abudu, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.